Beyond the Books is a podcast from the School of Literatures, Languages and Cultures at the University of Edinburgh that gives you a behind-the-scenes look at research and the people who make it happen. I'm Ellen, your host, a PhD student in French and Francophone Studies, and this is our very first episode recorded from lockdown via Skype, featuring David Farrier, who is a senior lecturer in English literature and a researcher in the environmental humanities. He's also the author of Footprints in Search of Future Fossils, a brand new book on the deep future that you'll hear us mention in this episode. David was a fascinating guest, and it was an absolute pleasure to have him on. I hope you'll enjoy this chat as much as I did. A couple of trigger warnings before we get into the episode. We do go into quite a lot of detail about the impact of COVID-19 and surrounding issues of racism and classism that have emerged as a result of this pandemic. If this is something you're struggling with at the moment, discretion and self-care is advised. As always, the views expressed are our own and not necessarily indicative of those of the school as a whole. So, as always, be safe, all of you, and above all, be well. Enjoy the episode. Thank you. We're kicking off all of our interviews just with the same question, fairly basic one. How are you? It might sound trivial, but I think it's an important question to ask.
No, it is a really important question to ask, and I'm fine, thanks very much. We've been in lockdown a little bit longer than most because we decided to quarantine about a week before the rest of the country because my wife had some symptoms that seemed a bit suspicious.
I'm so sorry.
No, it was relatively mild, although it is taking a long time to get over, and the rest of us have been fine. So,
okay. I mean, the purpose of this podcast originally, before COVID-19 happened and before I got locked out of the studio, was to move beyond the books. And by that, we meant to sort of explore different methodologies, different ways of working. And that feels like it's suddenly become very normal for all of us in the space of, a week or fortnight, as you said. What have been the main challenges of the new normal working setup for you, or have there been any benefits?
One of the challenges is the same as one of the benefits in that for us as a family in my house, we are all together at the moment, which is a great thing. It's in that, we're getting to spend time with one another. We're freed to an extent from some of the demands of daily life, and there's been a lot. It's a blessing to be close to the people that you love at a time like this, because of course that's not true for everyone.
Yeah.
And it's a blessing to have a home where we all feel safe, which again is not true for anyone, and it's heartbreaking to think of that being the case. But our home is now it's our home, but it's a school. What school was on. This is the last day of the the Easter holidays at the moment, and it's a workplace for me and my wife, and a lot of things have been crammed in to this space, which is challenging. I think sometimes it's hard to know quite what you should be doing at any given moment. Should I be being a parent or a school kind of substitute teacher?
It's a really helpful thing to put out there, because I'm sure a lot of parents are thinking that.
Yeah, no, I think we have set a low bar in this house.
Good. It was interesting what you were saying about academic work kind of being or having to fit into the same space as everything else, because I think there's a lot of conversations we could have about invisible work in academia, about having to fit workloads around family life and how that's difficult in the best of circumstances, let alone, in the middle of a global pandemic. But I think conversely, it's a shift in how universities are being run. And I'm thinking about students and members of staff with maybe accessibility issues, with caring commitments that haven't always been, possible or protected by traditional academic setups. I was just wondering what you maybe thought. What were some improvements we could take from this, or some lessons that as an institution we could learn from the work from home setup?
Well, I mean, you're absolutely right to say that the caring responsibilities that many people have are suddenly much more visible than they might otherwise have been. And that can only be a good thing, I think. Of course, it's important how academic culture responds to that, but that increased visibility is really important. I think that one of the advantages perhaps of lockdown, or a benefit that we can take away, is it really has illustrated that point that, I think a lot of people have made. Particularly, it was made a lot during the most recent round of industrial action, that the university is not the buildings. The university is the people. It's the staff of all kinds and the students that make the university, and that's really what we've been left with. I mean, the building, we're locked out. We are, the only infrastructure that we've really got, is online, and really that is really just a manifestation of the interpersonal connections that really are the essence of the university. So, I mean, I hope that might be the basis for where we go next. When we reconvene.
I've got a couple of questions about your research, one that's a bit more pandemic related and one that's a bit broader. The first is about your book, which was recently published, so congratulations on that, first of all. The book is Footprints in Search of Future Fossils, and it explores what traces of present societies will persist in the deep future. And it was one of the first publications within our LLC community to have a virtual book launch at Blackwell's. How did you find that experience? How was it?
Well, I mean, I'll be honest, it was a way to cope with the disappointment of my physical book launch being cancelled, to be honest. It was meant to happen the day after we decided to, as a family, to go into lockdown.
Right.
But actually, I had decided over the weekend that I really had to call it off. It just seemed inappropriate to gather people, even the relatively small number that would be at a book launch. So I was feeling a bit down and missing the opportunity to kind of celebrate with friends, but also to kind of mark its presence in the world. When you produce a piece of work that's taken a long time, you live with it in your head for a while, and it's good to feel that it is a physical thing, but it's out there in other people's hands. So the book launch was, the virtual book launch that I did a few days later, to be honest, was just me wanting to divert my energy somewhere. Having said that, it was great. I really enjoyed it, and it was good to have an opportunity to be a bit more creative, perhaps, with these things. So I tried to replicate, the conventional book launch. I recorded a few readings, and posted them, and I posted links to where people could get a signed copy of the book, if they happen to want one. There were questions and conversations happening, but I also like on threads on Twitter, but I also put up a deep time reading list, which was not something I think I could have done really if it had been a physical launch. But it was nice to sort of give people lots of other things that they could perhaps take away and engage with, or follow up if they had interests or questions of their own. So it doesn't really replicate the real thing, but it was nice to feel that I could do something.
Yeah, it's really interesting what you said about wanting something that's been in your head and is not sort of perceptible from an external point of view to take on a physical form, to leave its mark on a kind of physical landscape. On a much smaller scale, I also feel the same about my thesis. I'll virtually submit it, but I'd quite like to see the thing printed and bound at some point. Would be nice. I think it's interesting the way you phrase that, given what the book is about. this idea of kind of a deep future and a new future. And I know that one strand of your research examines how literature, especially poetry, responds to the challenge of the current geological age, the deep time and the deep future. I suppose my first question would be I think there've been a lot of shifts in this field recently, and we can talk about that. But have you witnessed, I know we've only been in lockdown in a short time, but have you witnessed any interesting creative responses?
I've noticed there's a lot of chat online cautioning against actually the hot take. A lot of kind of fairly cynical tweets saying things like, I wonder when the next, the first COVID studies.
Yes, I've seen those as well.
The viral turn or something like that. We do have a, and I don't want to be completely cynical about this. There is perhaps an overvaluing of novelty sometimes in maybe in the humanities, or a drive to find the new thing that is bound up with the accelerated pace of academic research, which is itself bound up with lots of things to do with commodification of knowledge and the demands of the ref and so on. And maybe one of the outcomes of this might be a slowing down of scholarship, which I think in one sense wouldn't be a bad thing if we perhaps choose to be a little bit more reflective and ask ourselves, what do we really want to say about this situation, rather than publishing. I don't mean to say publishing for its sake. I know no one really does that, but maybe allowing ourselves the time to really work out what kind of intervention we want to make, rather than being driven by other kinds of external forces. That could be a good one.
That's really interesting. Do you think that, I know that this also could expose my ignorance of deep time, so I apologize in advance, but one question I wanted to ask you, and it's not just about COVID-19, I think our disciplines, would we all benefit from thinking about what we do, from thinking about the way we work, with an awareness that there are scales of time and pace that supersede not only the kind of the pace that we adopt day to day, the kind of quite frenetic publish or perish pace that academia requires us to take, but also just that a whole concept of time and scale and trajectories, professional or otherwise, is superseded by much bigger things and unfathomable things. Do you think deep time can teach us something about academia, both as an object of study and as a pace of study?
Yeah, well, I agree with you, although I maybe flip the terms on their head slightly, because for me, spending a lot of time thinking about deep time, our relationship with deep time, and particularly the deep future, the kind of worlds that we will leave behind for those who will follow us, has really helped me to see that deep time isn't just some abstract concept or a distant prospect, something that really has no relation to how we live and how we experience time. We inhabit the flow of deep time. I think that's true to say. We even though we can't see the processes unfolding, we are still living in the midst of them. Geologic processes, planetary cycles turning, and so on. But beyond that, we're also making our mark. We're intervening on the way those cycles are working, and the marks that we're making on the planet, the carbon we're putting in the atmosphere, the nuclear waste that we're hopefully going to be able to store safely so that it doesn't represent a threat to generations that follow, the plastic that's in the oceans, and so on and so forth. We'll have a very long life. We'll leave a lasting trace. It's projected it'll take 100,000 years for the last of the carbon that we've added to date from the atmosphere, for example. So these marks are going to shape the world that people who have yet to be born will live in. And so there's something really quite intimate about that. I think, so when I said I'd turn the terms on their head slightly, what I mean is, for me, deep time, thinking with deep time, is very much thinking about our closeness to what might seem very different, distant and different, perhaps. There's a kind of reorientation of perspective involved when you, I think, try to see things from a deep time perspective. Things that we might put very far from ourselves actually come very close. The actions that I take now could, play their role in shaping the kind of world that someone who is yet to be born lives in. And so I think we can all benefit from that shift in perspective of really breaking down what we see to be distance and separation, and finding the closeness, the connection, and the proximity that it conceals.
That's a really beautiful answer. It's interesting. I come from a Francophone post-colonial studies background, and listening to you speak about the perspective of deep time, I think that sense of the very distant or the other coming closer and being something that's personal. I think we can also apply that to the kind of xenophobic othering of people that's come about through this pandemic. I mean, also in general.
Yeah.
And it strikes me as interesting as well, kind of given I know that you also come still from a post-colonial background. I mean, I think the first question I'd want to ask is, do you see a relationship between deep time and post-coloniality, or is that kind of incidental?
Well, what I certainly see is a kind of a connection between colonial legacies and the Anthropocene. The era of human that we're now said to inhabit. Which is often taken as a kind of catch-all term for this extraction-driven, growth-oriented world that is heading towards climate catastrophe. I was very clear that this is another legacy of colonialism that simply saw the natural world as a resource, that saw other cultures as expendable, that operated on this very kind of linear trajectory, always working towards the next frontier, always working towards the next exhaustible line of natural resources. So I certainly do see a connection there, definitely.
The example I was thinking of specifically was, I come from a Francophone post-colonial background, as I said, where I think underlying colonial fault lines and current societal models have just been exposed for all that they are again and again. There was quite a striking example of a head of intensive care at a Parisian hospital, a man called Dr. Jean-Paul Mirat, who said that we asked, whether we should be doing coronavirus studies in Africa where there are no masks, no treatments, no resuscitation, a bit like elsewhere for studies on AIDS, is a direct quote. Obviously this statement is incredibly disturbing and problematic on quite a lot of levels, but it's just led me to wonder to what extent this pandemic is also part of a crisis of the post-colonial present or post-colonial realities in the way that we live currently.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's very astute. We're often told that we're in a new world now. There was Rebecca Solnit said, the impossible has already happened. We're in a new space now. Aaron Daphne Roy said, that the pandemic is a portal to somewhere new, and that they're writers I have huge respect for and would have no intention of kind of gainsaying. But it's striking to me as well how much this new world looks very much like the old one, in terms of who is vulnerable, who's exposed, where injustice resides. I was reading a few days ago, I'm sure you might have seen this before, and others who are listening as well, that if you're a person of color in the United States, you are vastly more at risk. And the figures are astonishing. It's something 70 or 80% of the deaths in cities like New Orleans and Chicago are of people of color. And so they're in some ways, this is not a new world. This is the old world, absolutely rampant. The challenge is to sort of find those glimpses of the new, and really take hold of them and work out what they mean and how we can replicate them on a more kind of sustainable basis, I think.
Yeah, there are. if we take an optimistic perspective, have you seen any models of resistance, creative or otherwise? I mean, you mentioned some beautiful writers, two of my favorites actually, but have you seen any responses or any models of resistance that have given you hope or given you cause to be optimistic?
I think what gives me cause to be optimistic is the fact that, you know, the pandemic has really illustrated the value of individual action. It's been a big question for a long time, hasn't it? You know, does it make any difference whether I, you know, give up eating meat or curtail my flights, you know, or stop using single-use plastic? You know, it's system change we need. And of course we do need system change. But what we've seen now is individual action on a mass scale having a transformative effect. And, you know, it's been messy. It's been distressing as well. But we, you know, I think we've also seen that, you know, we can do small things ourselves, and that be a meaningful part of a much wider action. So rather than look to, you know, I don't know, you know, projects or artworks or initiatives, I'm most inspired by the fact that it's demonstrated that, you know, small scale action can be scaled up, which I think is most important going forward.
You touched on a really interesting point, and I think that this loops back to your research and your field of interest. I think the main skepticism, as you rightly identified, that a lot of people have for, say, reducing meat or plastic or whatever it be, is that an individual on a global scale can't make a difference or can't make as much of a difference to, you know, the overall environmental state and health of the planet. And I suppose my question would be, what do you think the trickle down effect of individual action can be? That's a really broad question, I'm sorry, and it's not very helpful. I mean, more, you know, I suppose, can there be a trickle down? That's a better way of putting it. Can there be a trickle down effect of individual action?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I mean, it shapes communities. It can direct political will in the right circumstances. It engages us ethically with these questions, I think, as well. It brings them home in a very simple sense, you know, and that's been one of the disorienting things about the virus, is that sense, you know, unless you've had a positive test or been so ill that there's no ambiguity, none of us are really sure whether we've had it or not, or whether we've got it or not. We live in this kind of dual state. And that, I think, is a profoundly ethical one, because we always have to, I think, if we're being conscientious, imagine ourselves ill and act accordingly. And yeah, I think there's, so it kind of brings home the question, and that's again the value of individual action. I think is it makes it personal, invests us in it. Of course, you know, just, you know, this does need to lead then to system change. It's all very well us, you know, not flying, but I think flights account for what is it? It's less than 5% of global emissions. It's maybe more like 2 or 3. And in fact, you know, when we saw those photographs of, you know, the emissions cloud lifting from mainland China and so on, that was actually the cessation of heavy industry that did that. So, you know, it's not enough to say that, you know, on its own, individual consumer choices can make the difference, but, you know, we're also political communities, and I think we can drive from this point towards more meaningful change. Certainly,
it's you just made me think of another article I read about the privilege of pandemic that I think Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez commented on in relation to areas like the Bronx in New York, and, you know, obviously areas in the UK as well, where being able to quarantine is a privilege, and it's just a luxury that's not affordable to people, just in the same way that, you know, choosing to, or being able to live a kind of zero waste or plastic free or vegan lifestyle is not a choice that is tangibly, practically afforded to many people. And again, this is a very big open question that is not easy to answer, but, you know, I think, would you agree that with with this pandemic, we also kind of have to massively reevaluate our own privilege and look at ways of offsetting it, or at least kind of trickling down the socioeconomic means that afford us the ability to be quarantined and to make those decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's really illustrated how these kind of equalities are damaging to people's mental health. But if you're isolating alone,
yep,
or on the in a fifth floor flat with small children, that I think again the costs are becoming a lot more visible.
Yep.
But also as you say, the disparity in exposure is galling. And I think we can't forget that. Although history doesn't give us many examples to be buoyant about. I was the last class that I did online before the end of the semester. We looked at Olivia Lang's Crudo, which is a kind of social media novel. It's just someone who's always checking Twitter and always responding to the news, and it's sort of set in the months in the middle of the year in 2017, I think, and it's
post Brexit.
Post Brexit. It's full of references to Grenfell Tower.
Yes.
And the day I was doing a class online about it, there was an item in the news about how still there were buildings clad in this deadly material. So where am I going with this? I suppose we've seen that we've had this kind of vulnerability made completely plain before, and action hasn't been taken. I mean, I suppose that the thing to say is we can't afford to let that lesson go again.
Yeah. It's interesting. You just made me think of vulnerability and the way Judith Butler describes it as something that's inherent to public life, and the knowledge that my life can be expunged at will, at the will of another, or that another person's life could be conversely expunged through mine. I think it's that there needs to be, at least seems from what you're saying, a response has to be centered on vulnerability and care, and kind of reworking that back into the fabric of how we live. At least it would be a good start. You mentioned Crudo by Olivia Lang, which I would thoroughly recommend if people haven't read it. It's excellent. We're also asking on a slightly lighter note, any books people have been enjoying reading, any podcast recommendations, films, documentaries. I mean, your book obviously would be top of the list of things we'd recommend. Can you buy it online still?
You can, you can get it, and please do. If you are minded to buy it, consider buying it from an independent bookshop as well. And Lighthouse Books are very happy to deliver. For example, other independent bookshops are available.
Lighthouse have got an excellent book. I think you can buy a book for someone else and have it delivered to them as well. They've got some really good initiatives in place.
So they're not endangering key workers that way. But they're fantastic, and a really vital part of our community, I think. So please do support them. But you're looking for book recommendations apart from mine. Crikey. Well, I mean, reading's been a solace, but I'll admit, it's not always easy to concentrate. But I have really enjoyed, as something that is a real tonic and antidote to the times. It's a book called Greenery by Tim Dee. Subtitle is Journeys in Spring. And it's a beautiful, beautiful book about the spring, about the return of new life, about what green means to us. And it's a book that's full of life and joy. And the prose is just astonishing, beautiful. So I'd highly recommend that. But if anyone's after something that's maybe also kind of nourishing and uplifting, but maybe also perhaps engaged with questions of care, I've been reading a lot of John Berger's essays, and also reread his short book A Fortunate Man, which is I guess it's more like a long essay really about a country doctor in the mid-1960s, someone that Burgess spent 6 weeks living with and observing him in his community. And it's just incredible, because the doctor, John Sassel, is intent on treating every patient as a total person, not just as a patient. And it's just the most heartwarming, uplifting, thought-provoking to complete the trio of cliches, this on care and on how we care by paying attention, and John Berger is just the most incredible writer as well. So yeah, whether you want to step out of the pandemic or maybe just step towards it slightly, I'd recommend either of those books.
Oh, thank you. That's a lovely, lovely response. And I love that idea as well. If you can't go out into greenery, maybe retreating inside a book or somewhere that's safe but still just as full of life. And so that's a lovely, lovely image and a really nice possibility. We'll try and find a way to link to those texts if people are interested in buying them. Do you listen to podcasts? Do you like podcasts?
I do, yeah.
Any recommendations other than this, obviously?
Well, I one I listen to a lot is called Literary Friction, which is it usually features an author being interviewed, but there's lots of kind of book chat around it. It's always a good place to pick up new recommendations. The most recent episode had Jenny Offill talking about. And Jenny Offill is just incredible and everyone's time. So yeah, there's a third recommendation. If you want a brilliant novel of the moment, then do check out Weather. But yeah, I'd certainly recommend Literary Friction. Is a really great podcast.
That's actually one of the few podcasts I do not subscribe to, so I'll have to go and have a listen and check it out. Thank you so much for those recommendations. And just, I think as a final one, obviously the title of this podcast is Moving Beyond the Books, and we're challenging all of our listeners and all of our participants to think about kind of what we can learn by moving beyond the confines of our traditional academic practice. So I guess the question would be, and you might have answered this already, I might go back through editing and find that you've answered this for me, but what do you think you've learned? What's the main thing you've learned from moving beyond how you were working before in this new normal?
I think I've learned there's an important question to ask, and I don't think I've got any more than the question to offer at the moment. I don't have to it, but it's really shown to me that it's important that we ask ourselves what really matters. Yeah. A lot of the things that we do in the course of our working life, we do maybe because they're habit or because we've always done them. And I'm not saying I want to burn it all down. Maybe I do. I don't know. But I mean, a lot of things have been stripped back. A lot of what we would do, we can't. And it's good, I think, to reflect on, what is most important. What's the essence of this job, and what do I want to hang on to, and what perhaps could we afford to do differently or otherwise, or maybe not at all. So I think it's a question that I need to spend more time with, but certainly that's what's come to me.
Thank you. That's a beautiful answer. Thank you so much for coming to talk to me, David. I really appreciate it.
No, so thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I'm just going to try and figure out how to turn this off. Nope.